Hey there, welcome to another episode of WeighOut Wednesday. My name is Dr. Ashley Southard. I'm the site director and clinical therapist at a New Beginning Outpatient Treatment Center and also the co-founder and program director of the Healthy Way Out Emotional and Binge Eating Weight Loss Program, both located in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now, this month I'm talking about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart as a trauma therapist, which is really looking at the emotional roots of emotional and binge eating, really trying to get a deep understanding of how and why this eating behavior developed. Now, here at the Healthy Way Out, it is our very core belief that this behavior makes perfect sense, but it's not always obvious, right? We can't always see how the dots connect right there on the surface. So sometimes we have to go a bit deeper and we have to go back in time and look at when this behavior first started developing and looking at the context and looking at what was going on inside of you to really understand how and why this behavior makes sense. So what I'm dedicating the month of April to is going back in time and looking at these early life experiences that we have as children that may actually set the stage for emotional and binge eating to develop. Now, what I mentioned what I explored in the first video of April is looking at how some children grow up in homes where there's very little to no emotional guidance, meaning nobody is there to teach a child what is going on for them emotionally. So instead of going through their emotions, they have to go around them because nobody's teaching them. And emotional and binge eating is a very common way that children learn how to go around their emotions. Now, last week I talked about some very specific early life experiences that can be very stressful for a child. And again, if there's nobody guiding them through these stressors, then a child is very vulnerable to reaching for food as a way to get some relief and some soothing from those stressors. Okay, so I want to add to the conversation this week by talking about the invalidation of feelings that so many people struggling with emotional and binge eating actually experienced as children. And what I mean by an invalidation of your feelings is that some way, somehow, your family system that you were growing up in conveyed a sense to you that what you were feeling and how you were expressing it was simply not okay. And so somehow you got this message: it's not okay for you to feel X, Y, and Z. You need to keep that to yourself. You need to keep that under control. And this is then where a child would be set up for possibly needing food as a way to manage all of those emotions that are getting stuffed inside, okay? Now, there are two main emotions that I so often hear from my clients that they would get invalidated on when they were a child. And those two emotions are fear and anger. So I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but I hear this all too often, that when they were scared as a child, or when they would feel anger or some version of anger, maybe frustration or irritability, or just kind of being mad or grumpy, that they would get some kind of message back from the system that would say, that's not acceptable. So with sadness, it's a very organic response to want to cry when we're feeling sad. We also tend to want comfort from someone who we consider to be a safe person. And when we're a child, that's typically our caregiver or our parent. So when a child is sad, it's very, very normal for them to cry and to cling to their parent. And in some cases, the clients that I'm working with struggling with emotional and binge eating will say, when I would cry or when I would cling to my mom or dad, instead of getting a loving, soothing response, which is what every child needs in those moments, instead they would get an invalidating response. Something like, stop being such a baby. What's the matter with you? Get off of me. You want to cry? I'll give you something to cry about. Okay, so they would get this message that what they were feeling and what they were doing to express that feeling wasn't acceptable, and it certainly wasn't going to get a loving, soothing response. And the same is true when these children would express anger. So they would get upset about something and they would try to express that anger, which most children, most humans express anger by talking loudly, doing something kind of aggressive, maybe doing something physical, saying a bad word. So doing different things like that, and then again getting this response from their family system that says, that's not okay. You better knock it off right now. You are out of control. I'm not going to talk to you until you are fine. Go to your room. But they would get this message that their anger was not okay. And this would get even more confusing in those family systems where the child wasn't allowed to express anger, but then they would watch their parent kind of go off the deep end and get really, really angry. So I hear that a lot too, that they'll say, Dad would either be fine or he would be exploding in anger, but anytime I showed any drop of anger, it would get shut down. Okay, there's a lot of other emotions, of course, that can get invalidated in the family system. So, anything that's outside of the I'm fine box may have been invalidated. Sometimes people will say, if I got too excited or too happy, my family would shut that down. If I would feel hurt or if I would feel, betrayed, or if I would feel lonely, I would get that shut down as well. So I'm just pointing out fear and anger because those seem to be some of the most common ones that I hear, but certainly know that there's a wide range of emotions that many emotional and binge eaters will report having been invalidated when they were young. Now, there are two ways that a system can invalidate your emotions. There's a direct invalidation, and then there's an indirect invalidation. And a direct invalidation is going to be a family member responding to you with something very clear that says to you, you can't feel this way. So if you're feeling sad and you're crying and you're clinging to your mom, and a direct invalidation response would be, stop crying. What's wrong with you? You have nothing to be crying about. You're fine. Okay? You are directly getting this message from your caregiver, from your attachment figure, usually your parent, that says this emotion is not okay. You need to shut it down and you need to be fine. Now, indirect invalidation is going to be where there isn't an overt verbal message per se, but you're still getting the message that you need to shut this emotion down. So indirect invalidation will often come in the form of ignoring your emotions. So nobody's actually telling you to stop feeling this way, but they're simply not responding to you. So these are the family systems where people are crying, people are angry, people are sharing what's going on with them, and the family just doesn't really respond. So maybe you start crying and mom walks away, or maybe you're feeling angry and dad, just leaves or stonewalls you and refuses to talk to you. Okay, so this is going to be the kind of indirect invalidation that can be just as harmful and damaging as the direct invalidation. Okay. Another way that children can be invalidated is if they're feeling something and they express that, but somehow the attention gets turned onto the parent's emotions or that attachment figure's emotions. So maybe the child is saying, I'm really sad about this, I'm really upset about this, and maybe the parent's response is, oh yeah, well, how do you think it makes me feel? So that can also be an indirect invalidation. There's no attention or attunement giving to what's going on for you, and instead it gets directed towards how the parent is doing, and now the attention is on them and no attention is on your emotions. Okay, so what happens inside of a child then when they are experiencing emotional invalidation? Well, children assume a lot of responsibility for what happens in their world. So if good things are happening, children take on that and say it's because I'm a good kid. But when bad things are happening or things that feel bad, then the child will also take that on as there must be something bad about me that this is happening. So when a child is being invalidated, it gets them to start questioning, what's wrong with me that I'm feeling this way? My parent is telling me I should be fine, or they are acting as though I should be fine, but I'm not fine. So what is wrong here? There must be something I'm doing wrong emotionally that's creating this. So it sets into motion a lot of doubt, a lot of insecurity within oneself, but also sets up this conflict of I shouldn't be feeling this way, and yet I am. I don't know what to do about that. And this is where then a child is very vulnerable to turning to food to get that soothing and that comfort and that emotional relief. Okay, if your feelings are invalidated and the expectation is that you're going to be fine, you're not going to show these emotions, you're not going to disrupt the system, then you have to stuff down those emotions, right? Somehow you have to keep them inside. And if you think about overeating, it's really stuffing down food that really becomes then a metaphor for stuffing down those emotions. And as I've said many times before, food is a developmentally appropriate drug of choice. It's what is available for children to get them the soothing and the comfort that they need. So when they're invalidated, when they don't have anywhere to turn with all of these feelings, they're very likely going to turn to food. And once that pattern gets established, that when I feel something, I've got to stuff it down, and the way I do that is vis-a-vis food, that becomes a very ingrained pattern of behavior that you then take into adulthood. And that can be very difficult to get out of. And you think a diet's going to get you out of it. You think an exercise plan is going to get you out of it. But it's not a food or an exercise issue, it's an emotional issue. And starting to work with your emotions and validating your emotions is actually how you get out of this. So bringing this forward into today, how can you start to help yourself if invalidation was something that was a part of your early life experience? So the first step in really breaking out of this is starting to recognize that maybe there was some invalidation in your environment growing up, and as a result, you now respond to yourself the same way. You now invalidate yourself the same way that your caregivers invalidated you. So when you feel an emotion, what do you say to yourself? Do you say, how stupid that you're feeling that way? Do you say, you shouldn't be feeling that way? Everyone else is fine, so what's wrong with you? How do you kind of shut that emotion down even within yourself? So start to notice that invalidation that you do. And then the second step is to start working on validating yourself. Do the opposite. So you want to say to yourself, it makes sense that I'm feeling this way. Of course I'm feeling this way. It's okay for me to be feeling this way. I may not like it, and it's still okay for me to be feeling this way. We actually can't control what emotions come up for us. So the best thing we can do is when they pop up, even if we don't like them, work on validating them. All of our emotions deserve some space in our life. And when we give our emotions our space, we actually will feel a lot better, okay? So really start to pay attention to that process inside of yourself where you invalidate your emotions, catch yourself doing that, and see if you can do the opposite and validate those emotions. I think you'll find that once you can start to master this skill, a lot of doors are going to open for you in your healing process. And you're going to find that if you're not stuffing down your emotions with invalidation, you're not going to need food to help you keep those emotions stuffed down. It's a really beautiful thing, and you absolutely can do this, okay? Every human being can learn how to do this. So there is a lot of hope. You do not have to live with emotional and binge eating forever. It can stop, and you can make that happen. Okay, so work on that validation of feelings, and then we'll come back together next week for our last conversation this month about the emotional roots from our past that led to the emotional and binge eating. All right, have a great week. See you soon. Bye-bye.